Hello. In this presentation, we're going to look at the features and contents of a very detailed probate inventory that dates from 1686. What is a probate inventory? It's a valuation of the goods owned by a recently deceased person at the time they passed away. It's conducted by one or more local people, usually called appraisers, who survey the deceased property and value everything they find. The inventory and valuation were then presented in handwritten form to the diocesan court in Gloucester, where it became an official record of the court. In theory, anyone whose belongings justified it could have an inventory drawn up after their death, but it proved particularly useful where the person died intestate. So in other words, they passed away without leaving a will. In these circumstances, an administrator would be appointed to dispose of the deceased goods. So it was important to have a list and valuation of these for the administrator to work from. Note that not everyone who left a will also had their goods surveyed. So because a will survives for a person, this doesn't mean that an inventory will as well. Probate inventories survived for the Diocese of Gloucester between the years 1587 and 1800. But other than for the year 1587 itself, there are very few before the period from 1660 onwards. The amount of detail in inventories varies greatly. Many, like the one we're going to examine today, have a full room-by-room listing of goods, but others, particularly 18th century ones, can be much more skimpy in the level of detail they contain. The quality of presentation also varies greatly. The 1686 example we're going to look at is written in a neat and very legible hand, but others can seem scrawled, both in terms of poor handwriting and a generally messy presentation. They can also be heavy in abbreviations and in what we would consider to be poor spelling. The value of the goods can be presented using Roman numerals too, certainly during the 17th century, so you may need a basic knowledge of these to work the figures out. Thus, they can certainly present challenges in both reading and interpretation, for all that they give interesting and valuable information. With this in mind, a number of Gloucestershire Heritage Hub's volunteers have been involved in a project to transcribe these inventories. Because of the number of documents involved, this work, which began almost a decade ago, is still ongoing, but we are grateful to everyone who has contributed to this project. When completed, the transcriptions will be added to our online catalogue, and we will announce when this happens. In the meantime, you can view the original Gloucestershire probate inventories online through the Ancestry website. And at the end of this presentation, I'll show you how you can search that site to find them. So let's look at the 1686 inventory we'll be concentrating on. This is the first of 6 pages of listings, and I'm going to work through each page, section by section, picking out some of the items mentioned, and also talking about occasional spelling issues. The first thing to say is that this is the inventory of goods of Mrs. Isabella Harwood, widow, and we're told this in this heading at the top of the document. This is a fairly standard heading. Sometimes they will also give the regnal year of the current king or queen, and usually they will tell you where the deceased lived when they passed away, which this one doesn't. I do know where Isabella lived, but I'm going to keep you in suspense for now and reveal this later. In the meantime, see if you can guess how I know where she lived. And just looking at the word chattels, these are the deceased movable property, so not livestock, buildings, or land. this inventory, we are firstly given the value of a few miscellaneous items, but before moving on to a room-by-room listing. It is fairly standard for the first entry to value the deceased wearing apparel and their money, either in purse or at hand. You can spot a few words spelt in a different way to that which we'd expect nowadays. Spelling hadn't settled down at this time. Much of it was done phonetically, as the word sounded when it was said. Thus it can vary around the county as different dialects pronounce words in different ways. As with the general quality of the handwriting, the spelling in this document is pretty good. Note one feature, though, that's fairly common to this late 17th century period. A word that appears a few times and is clearly meant to be silver appears with a U in place of the V. This is because the letter U could be used for both letters, V and U, at this time. It was only during the 18th century that use of the distinct letter V came into general use. This being pre-decimalisation, we are given figures in columns of pounds, shillings and pence. If you're uncertain about this, there were 12 pence in a shilling and 20 shillings in a pound. The first column, headed by a figure that looks only vaguely like our pound sign, is the pound column, and it is usual for the columns to work from left to right in descending order of value. In the figures column, note that the writer's number 1 is formed in a different way to how we'd write it today. It has a little tail sloping to the left. This is quite common in this period. And one more word to point out, a silver salt will be a salt cellar. We're then given the value of the linen, and a few different types of linen are listed. Holland cloth is a plain woven linen, imported from Europe, and particularly, as the name suggests, from the Netherlands. There's a reference to pillow bears, and these are what we now know as pillowcases. Flax is a plant used to create linen textiles, and was particularly used for bed sheets, underclothes, and table linen. Diaper is a fine linen, which has a diamond pattern in its weave. Damask is a woven fabric that could be made out of a variety of material, often, again, with a pattern in its weave. Its name gives a clue to its origins, as it came initially from Damascus. Calico is a woven textile made from unbleached or white cotton cloth. Again, the clue to its origins is in its name, as it comes from Calicut in southwest India. At the bottom of each page, we're given a total value of the goods on that page. Notice that equal signs are used to link a few words on the page, including at the end and beginning of lines, rather than the single dash that we're used to today. Spot too how this particular hand likes to indicate capital letters with a flourish. The list of linen items continues at the top of page 2. The capital letter in the word on the top line before flatson is an F, making the word fringed. Often in this period, a capital F will be indicated by two lowercase f's placed together, and we'll see an example of this later. Even in a careful hand like this one, people were often not consistent in how they formed letters at this time, and you can sometimes find multiple forms of the same letter within one document. And then one more thing to pick out from this slide, hemp comes from the cannabis plant, and it's used to create clothing and homewares. Next, we're given a list of pewter items. Pewter is a metal alloy mainly composed of tin. A cistern is a waterproof receptacle for catching and storing liquids, especially rainwater. Notice that different plates are used for cheese, pies, and pasties. A porringer is a bowl with a handle, while a flagon is a large jug for drink. A still is used to distill liquid measures by first boiling and then cooling the liquid. And then finally, a necessary stool was a portable toilet in the form of a cabinet or box made at sitting height with an opening on the top covered by a lid. Now to look at the contents of the parlour. As its name suggests, an elbow chair was a chair with long armrests. The parlour listing continues at the top of page 3. Andirons were used in a hearth to rest logs on before they were added to the fire. Under a variety of spellings, they are a common feature in inventories of this period. The word after brass in line 6 on this slide is fire shovel, giving another example of the use of a U instead of the letter V. You may have already spotted the lowercase t that the writer uses, illustrated again in the word tongs at the end of line 6, which doesn't look quite like a T as we'd recognise it today. And there's another example of the capital F in fender on the line below. In the hall, a wainscot is a wall or furniture panel made from oak. And on the line below, there's the word escutcheon, which in this instance is probably a piece of hinged door furniture used to protect the door's locking mechanism by hanging over it, though alternatively it might imply a decorative heraldic device. We're now in the best chamber, which has the features of a master bedroom. A valance is a hanging border of cloth, usually around a bed curtain. A bolster is a long pillow. Note the level of detail here. We're told that the curtains of the bed are coloured red, and that the rug is old, while the window curtains are ordinary. By contrast, the carpet is made of silk. And now for the contents of pages 4 and 5. And the next slide, we're in the kitchen chamber. This isn't the kitchen itself, which is still to come, but is clearly a bedroom, presumably adjacent in some regard to the kitchen. A flock bed is stuffed with wool, while a coverlid is a fabric covering the bed. A modern example will be a quilt or a duvet cover. Note that there's little difference between this hand's capital I's and F's. The clue to which is the short rightward stroke on the F. We're now in the bedchamber above the buttery. Once again, we're given the colour of the bed curtains. An arras is a piece of tapestry work whose origins were in the town of Arras in northern France. And then right at the bottom of this slide, the word squabs. A squab is a well-stuffed cushion or sofa. There's interesting use too of the word wrought. We usually associate this word with ironworking, but in this case it may be used to indicate that the covers and squabs are homemade. Now another bedchamber that's above the parlour. Once again, we're given the colour of the bed curtains and also the colour of the rug, though the latter being yellow could indicate either its original colour or the effect of it being aged. The contents of the bedrooms listed, we now move into the kitchen. A table board is a tabletop, while a cheek was the iron side of a fire grate. A jack is a clockwork mechanism used to turn a spit. And a gridiron has nothing to do with American football, but is an iron grill used to grill meat over a fire. A dripping pan was placed under a spit to collect the rubbish from the meat cooking. A skillet is a cooking pot with 3 small legs, which sometimes appears in these inventories called a posnet. Drawer boxes are basically drawers. One of them was potentially a cutlery drawer. A pestle is a heavy and blunt club-shaped object which is used for grinding, and the accompanying mortar is a stone bowl in which the ingredients to be ground were placed. A warming pan is a metal container, usually shaped like a frying pan with a handle and lid. Embers from the fire would be placed in the pan, which was then put under the covers of the bed to warm and dry it before use. The buttery was not used for storing butter, but was a storage room for keeping alcoholic drinks, as well as the crockery used for drinking them. A meal iron is possibly a long fork used for taking meat out of a cauldron. If so, it would be more commonly called a flesh fork at this time. Note the use of the 2 lowercase f's to indicate a capital letter, which I mentioned earlier. That is different to the writer's earlier practice of using what we now recognise as a capital letter. And now the final pages of the inventory. The dividing lines indicate that only the top entry on this page is contained in the brew house, but we'll discuss all entries on the page together. The furnace is a cauldron, and the mesh vate was a mashing tub used to mix ground malt and boiling water when making beer. The leases indicate the estimated income of the land leased by Mrs. Harwood, and the Dean and Chapter reference indicates that much of her land is leased from the cathedral. There's clearly a distinction being made between that land and the one lease of Bishop's land, so I wonder whether the latter is leased directly from the Bishop rather than from the cathedral. It's clear that the leases account for 9/10 of her total estimated value at death, so this income is clearly significant. There's no indication that she used the land herself, so perhaps she was subletting it. Now we'd expect the word lumber to indicate wood, but at this time the word was used to indicate small items which weren't worth valuing separately. Underneath the listing, we're given the total estimated value of the deceased's estate, and then the signatures of the appraisers. The top signatory is William Lamb, with an E on the end of Lamb. His first name is abbreviated. The I and A are missing, but there's a line above the 2 L's to indicate that letters are missing from the signature. This appears on page 7 of the document. It's written in Latin and is clearly in a different and rather messier hand to the earlier writer. It's a clause added when the rest of the inventory was presented to the diocesan court, which is indicated by the abbreviated reg gloss in the top line. And this indicates that it's been approved and the inventory will be stored in the diocesan registry as a matter of record. It's presented on the 3rd of June, which is written in Latin Junii, in 1686 by Livia Harwood, the deceased daughter. The clause indicates that Mrs. Harwood passed away intestate without leaving a will, which is why the inventory of her estate was necessary. I mentioned earlier that I knew where Mrs. Harwood lived. Have you worked out yet how I know? This note appears on the back of the inventory, and it's fairly standard for a note of this kind to appear there. Again, it's added by the diocesan registry, and it notes whose inventory appears on the reverse. Written in Latin again, it notes that Isabel Harwood was lately of the city of Gloucester, abbreviated again to Gloss. Unfortunately, we don't have a more specific address, but at least we know that she lived in the city. This has been a particularly detailed and well-written inventory, but I hope it's given a flavour both of the information that can appear in these documents and some of the terms and spelling idiosyncrasies that you will come across when using them. I mentioned that the Gloucestershire probate inventories appear on the Gloucestershire subsection of the Ancestry website, and you can go directly to the Gloucestershire portion of that site using this link from the Gloucestershire Archives website. When you're on that page, look for the link most of the way down the page, which is indicated here by the arrow, where you can access Ancestry free at the archives or in Gloucestershire libraries or the Gloucestershire Family History Centre, or you can subscribe to it at home. Click on that link and this search box appears. Scroll down the page and you find a list of more specific data collection options. The first of which is Gloucestershire Wills and Inventories 1541 to 1858. Don't be fooled by these dates. Images of Gloucestershire wills for the whole of that period appear on the database, but as I mentioned earlier, the probate inventories survive for a more limited period between 1587 and 1800. Choose that link, and this box appears, allowing you to search to see whether your ancestors had an inventory created after they passed away. Please note that if you are accessing the documents at home, you can use this search engine free of charge, but are likely to be asked to subscribe to the Ancestry site to view images of the inventories that you find. I hope you found this presentation helpful. Good luck with your research, and please email this address if you have any questions about these documents that we haven't answered. Thank you.